Welcome to Financial Foresight. This podcast was made by 4 fee-only CFP professionals to help consumers understand the financial industry. Let's meet your hosts.
They're either naive, they're stupid, or they're lazy.
You know, the other thing is my ceiling fan just went out in my kitchen today.
He is the commander-in-chief on this video right now. And man, I am feeling controlled and I'm empowered and safe.
Don't stop for Dwight's baby. We can edit that out.
All of the podcast hosts are owners of RIAs registered in their respective home states. All commentary on this podcast represent the opinions of individuals and not their firms. All commentary is financial education, not financial advice. So let's get started.
We're live.
Nice.
Welcome to the Financial Foresight Podcast. Ian, Colin here today as well. Dwight couldn't make it today, but guys, thanks for joining us. And I wanted to kick it off with a comment and just see and kind of pick your brains what you're talking with clients or just individuals or anybody about from the standpoint of like expenses and where can people review what they're spending on. Obviously, sometimes we have more time on our hands. Sometimes people have less depending on their situation and the work from home. But anything that comes top of mind that you feel like is worth sharing that maybe would be applicable?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing that I start out with when clients are asking me what they should be evaluating right now is their amount of money that they're spending on food. It's really interesting because during this period of time, like obviously if you're getting like pickup food from Harris Teeter, which is the local grocery store here, it costs an extra $5 to get it picked up, which is not a big deal. But so much of food expenses is usually social, right? It's like going out to eat at a restaurant or going to do some activity, going out for drinks, something like that. And what I've noticed is that for some people, there's like a steep drop in what their food expenses have looked like recently. And for others, at least in March, there was a huge spike because they were stockpiling food that they thought they would need, right? So figuring out what the new normal is for you as far as food costs is going to be pretty important because I just don't see this pandemic being over next week, for instance. So, you know, we might be 2, 3, 4 months of this. And so knowing what you're spending on that semi-discretionary but also necessity item is pretty important. You know, I'm all in favor of going out to eat or getting pickup rather from a local business, but just make sure that, you know, it's within the budget that you can afford. It's the first place I start.
Yeah, that's kind of a twofold answer, I guess I would give, how to track expenses. I mean, of course, you can use a lot of different things, such as to like the paid version of Right Capital or eMoney or any one of those, budgeting expense trackers, which I think is always great. Some clients find that to be super helpful, especially if you have maybe some spending problems, or sometimes it's kind of eye-opening to pull all of your credit cards and all the transactions onto one ledger, because usually we just see, one credit card here or maybe your business credit card over there, and then some stuff is ACH through the bank. It's hard to bring that all into one aggregate number, which in a lot of times can be really eye-opening that, oh my gosh, my $6 coffees really do add up, or, all these little things that we find. And maybe I do spend more on tea times than what I expected. So I always encourage clients to do that more of like a behavioral or an exercise tool. But more and less, I always like from the budgeting standpoint, try to think of like the pay myself first and like think of, how much do I need to be saving in order to accomplish my goals, et cetera, and try to get my saving taken care of first. Then whatever's left over is kind of like my play money. Obviously, these times are a little bit different, and we're thinking more of like, how do we adjust to our new lifestyle? And there seems to be really huge, major divergence, right? It's like on one side, if you still have your income and things are okay, you're probably spending less than what you were a month ago because we don't have, like to Ian's point, the social spending and going out for drinks and all that stuff. And so I've kind of been finding clients to be on both ends. It's like one side is either saving, and this is actually almost kind of a stimulus, a personal stimulus package for their savings. And on the other side, if your income is in danger, this could be a really scary moment. So it is kind of unfortunate. There's not a ton of people, it seems like, kind of in the middle. It's like almost one side or the other. And I really encourage people to definitely be taking a hard look in the mirror and understanding what their emergency fund looks like. How much is their rent or the mortgage? How much is their car payments? How much would they expect for groceries? And making sure that when you're looking at that stimulus bill or that stimulus paycheck coming in, that the emergency fund is fully loaded.
I think that's good advice. And I would just say the one area that I've thought about and continue to think about and push people to do is, just look at property and casualty insurance. So like home and auto. And if someone hasn't done that in a while, again, it's not huge dollars, but there can be significant, hundreds of dollars of savings there. And you could go back and that's just something easy to do, review it, especially if you're not driving for a long time you can adjust, what your deductible is. There's a lot of different ways to make some changes there to see savings. For me and for our family individually, like I saved $600 from doing that and just going through it. And I just reviewed it probably 18 months ago. And so I just switched carriers from that standpoint. But yeah, basically the same coverage, $600. Like I'll take that. And that's, that's worth the effort to at least go out and spend a little time. Yeah. Cause if someone said, hey, here's $600, I think we'd all take that. So there's a lot of different areas that you think about those bigger, expenses. Again, like to your point, Colin, like $6 coffees, all that other stuff. Yeah. So now you're making your coffee at home. Maybe you're not going out as much, but it's not the end all be all as far as like cutting all that stuff out. But, you look at how many people have lost their jobs and, unemployment, and those figures are, I don't know if you guys saw the GIF that was floating around on Twitter of just the unemployment claims. And then the last two, just how huge that is compared to anything else in history. I think it went back 60s or 70s and it was like insane to see that. We'll share the tweet, and I know it's floated around, but just to see that GIF, I've shown it to clients and friends. Even we did one of those like Zoom friends calls on Friday night with buddies, and I just like, hey guys, look at this. This is insane. And they saw that, they're like, wow. So I think it's just really, really eye opening to see how big of an impact this is from that standpoint.
Yeah. No, it is. And I like Colin's point that for some people, this is almost a non-event, like they're working from home or they're in an essential business, so they're still going into work. And maybe they're behaving a little bit differently during their day, but from a financial perspective, it might actually even be helpful because it's limiting the behaviors that they're spending money on. But for other people, this is like devastating. And if you're in that camp where you have been economically, we'll call it devastated or hit pretty hard by what's going on, maybe you lost your job and those things, that if it's okay, Isaiah, I just want to run through a couple of quick resources to look at. So the first is the CARES Act added a huge bonus to unemployment claims. So a $600 a week bonus for the next 4 months. So make sure to file your unemployment claim if you lost your job, or your underemployment claim or partial unemployment claim if you've got your hours cut, because you get $300 of that bonus plus your missed hours. So that can be very, very helpful. The second thing I would look at is, depending on the industry you're in or the area you're in, there are tons of funds being set up around the country that are designed to help people who are in difficult situations. A good example is my apartment complex actually set up a rent payment fund that they are managing. That's a huge benefit. So shout out to Camden. They're trying to take care of their people. And then, business communities are also creating grant programs and stuff in order to keep small businesses afloat during this period of time. And depending on your area, there may be more or less resources available, but that's stuff to look into. And then the last thing is, I would encourage you to reach out to somebody like one of us. We're more willing to give our time now than probably we ever have been. But then on top of that, I feel like we're always willing to give back. So if you just need 30 minutes of like, hey, this is my situation, can you walk me through it real quick? I just need someone to talk to about this. A lot of, financial planners and other CFPs or CFAs are willing to donate a little bit of their time to help out people in their community. So just take advantage of those resources. Make sure that you are filing for your unemployment benefits and that kind of stuff. But good luck.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know XY, which we're all a member of, they've done a great job at, rallying different people around to provide free advice and guidance to those that are affected and in need. So we'll make sure we link to that as well, as far as one of the outlets, to see if there's someone local, or if you want to talk to someone that's not local, make it easier for you to get that free advice. So you never have to, run into them. Do it that way too. But I think, yeah, absolutely take advantage of the people that are there that are willing to give their time and advice and guidance. So
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking about, tweet of the week and trying to go in a different direction, we have the random number generator. Boom, 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 boom.
And it popped me out this week.
It's Ian.
So I'm actually going to cover kind of a sillier tweet to lighten the mood before we dive back into some financial stuff. And this is from a streamer called Floggy, who streams on Mixer, and she's a gaming streamer. So we're taking a right turn down one of my roads right now. And the tweet says, "Oh God, it's Saturday and I still have turnips. Everyone tell me your turnip prices, please. Hashtag Animal Crossing, hashtag Animal Crossing New Horizon." And the reason that she tweeted this out, if you're not aware, is that there's a stalk market in Animal Crossing where you get 2 prices per day that you can sell your turnips on. And if you hold your turnips for 7 days, they expire. So you have a limited window of 6 days to sell these turnips at a profit. So my buy price last week, for instance, was 93 bells per turnip, and bells are just dollars. So $93 per turnip, and I sold mine at 181 per turnip. So I got almost 100% return.
Well
but
done.
this is
Nice.
just that panic mode that happens when you realize that you invested half of your Animal Crossing net worth into a root vegetable that might not be sellable in a couple hours. So what I wanted to show here is that investing fear exists even in video games. So just make sure to pay attention to what's going on, but also don't panic. She was able to find a friend who had a turnip sell price that was more than double what she paid for them. Went to their island, sold her turnips at a profit, and life was good because she didn't panic and sell them at apparently 59 bells a turnip, which would have been a 50% loss. So just keep that in mind, is that there's usually a reasonable, logical way to find an out to your situation. And sometimes you feel like you have 2 hours and the sky is falling, but it's usually not. So I just wanted to point that out. I also thought it would be a little bit of a fun lesson.
That's great. Nobody's built wealth panicking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Or maybe they built wealth be on the other side of the panic. Because there's the old quote that, times of stress, the rightful owners will regain the share of, the stock or whatever they're talking about. And I butchered that quote, but basically being patient, having, a long-term view. And again, you have to understand what your situation is and when the money is needed. And yeah, I think being patient and being, thoughtful around decisions is really, really important. So, don't panic, either being, have to sell or get too excited and emotionally charged to go do something when you don't necessarily need to. Sometimes it's just better to figure out where things are at and make sure, like we talked about, emergency funds and all those other things are in place prior to going and wanting to invest and do different things. So I'm a member of a couple different, dental Facebook groups, and it's been really interesting to see some of the stuff written in there. It just makes you scratch your head and say, what on earth, with people either thinking, this is what they want to do with all this money, or the world is ending and, what are we going to do? So there's just kind of this big span of, the world is falling, or this is the best opportunity since, the stock market existed or something. So it's just very, very interesting.
I actually find it really interesting how polarized people are on it. Like, you either see this as the end of the world, to your point, or you see it as the best thing that's happened in your lifetime. And for some reason, there's not a whole lot of people who are in between right now. Like, there's not a whole lot of people saying, well, this is just a regular part of the cycle outside of the financial industry. They're either like, oh, we're doomed, or, oh, this is awesome. It's like, okay, well, what if it's neither? I know that coronavirus is unprecedented, and a lot of aspects of this current crisis are very different than previous crises, but it's still, the 10-ish year crisis that the stock market has every 10-ish years, so.
And kind of going on that and building in today's, as we're recording this on Monday, April 6th, the market is just rallying right now. I think we're up like almost 5%, 4.5%. Was curious. I read something kind of interesting by Ben Carlson talking about, and they actually ranted a little bit with Michael Batnick on their Animal Experience podcast of, is it possible that the economy could drop lower than the stock market? And they were just talking about how in the past, most of the time when GDP goes down, it only needs to go down like in a lot of cases 2, 3, maybe 4%. And then the market ends up going down sometimes almost a multiple of 10, at least on average. And this, I'm not holding to any particular number here, but right now there's a very good chance that the GDP decline could be what? I mean, I'm scared to even throw a number out there, and I know usually it's annualized. So if people say 10%, they're actually talking about, that's just what it would be if Q1 or Q2 was replicated 4 times. But if the market's now down, we're kind of back into that 20% range. It's pretty amazing to think that GDP could go down 5%, 10%, which in historic terms, you'd expect a market to be down 50, 60, 80% then. We're down like 20, 25.
I think
it's what do you guys think of that?
I think it's interesting because it's a completely different world now. I view it from an investing perspective, and I'll talk about why in a couple of different reasons. One is like our entire investing platform is based on technology now, right? So it's not like people are standing there physically selling shares, which like the allegory everybody keeps using for what's going on right now is like the Great Depression, right? Well, the Great Depression was completely different, like from what the world looked like at the time to what the world looks like now. Also, investors are like a lot better informed than they were. And I know that we sometimes make fun of like the individual investor making bad decisions or whatever because we're financial planners and we like to tell jokes. But like in reality, there are blogs about finance now and they get read by millions of people. Like there is a lot more information out there. And then I think lastly, acting in favor of the market maybe doing something different is that the market is very, very emotional and is driven a lot right now by like sentiment, right? Or at least that's how we characterize it. And I just feel like the media machine is completely powerful right now, very different from what it used to be. You know what I mean? Like we're not getting our news over the radio now. We're getting our news from stock tickers on news channels that are operating, every second that the market is open. It's very different.
Yeah, and the Fed wasn't around to give away free money and just throw a ton of money into the market. So that's a big difference. I will, maybe douse the optimism with a little bit of water, but I think that's just kind of my personality. So yeah, I think there is a lot of similarities to the 20s, but yeah, it is very different now, but it's still run by humans and humans haven't changed. Like the emotion, the fear and greed, like that all still is prevalent, even though a lot more of the market is systematic today. There's a lot more infrastructure and like circuit breakers and all these different things built into the market that won't allow it to do some of the things that it used to do. But at the end of the day, if you shut down the economy and people continue to lose their jobs, you cannot tell me that the market does not react to that. And only being down 25% is, I think, a miracle all in itself. But we are still very, very early. We're 6 weeks, maybe 5 weeks into this right now. And things take months to play out. So my whole thing is just be patient. Don't rush to make any sort of decision one way or another, especially if you're one that's really apt to put money in. If you're making automatic contributions, I said a friend like, hey, should I stop that? No, I wouldn't stop doing what you're doing. You shouldn't change that. Now, if you said, hey, I want to put this big chunk of money all in, do I do it today? I don't know. Maybe you kind of wait or do it slowly over time as well. That way you don't have to say, hey, I put it all in April and I should have done it in May or something. Like just take your time with doing different things and don't let yourself get too wound up in the situation at the moment.
I agree with the thought process there, but I actually disagree a little bit with the methodology. I think if you have a large sum of money that you were already planning on investing, like I'm not saying rip out your emergency fund and throw it into the market. You need that money. You need to be able to float your expenses in case you lose your job. But putting it all in the market right now is actually an interesting proposition because we're never going to know where the theoretical bottom is, right? Like until a year, 2 years after the fact, when everything has kind of played itself out, to your point. And missing any number of good return days in the stock market severely hampers the return over a 10-year period. So I don't know if I agree with the idea that you should dollar cost average $100,000 into the market if you have a pure $100,000 to invest. I might just put it into the market and see what happens. Because if it goes down a little bit, okay, you lose, $10,000 temporarily. But what if, on the alternative, it goes up everything from here? Like, what if the economy starts recovering magically? And I'm not saying it should, because the coronavirus is still in full force and we haven't even hit the peak infection rate yet. But, your flip, I still view it as a coin flip. Everything's 50-50 right now, just like it is at any point. So if you have money to invest, just invest it. It's time in, not timing.
I would push back and disagree with that 100% from the standpoint of the best days in the market. A lot of times are also in the middle of a bear market where you have a huge drawdown. Mm-hmm. And so you see these huge 5, 6, 12% moves up. It's not healthy. That's not healthy market movements. And those typically happen in a bear market where you're already down 20%. So you will see bear market rallies where it's a fake. So it'll get people to come back in and it'll go lower. Again, if we look at the economy and people losing their jobs, like there's not going to be all this money that's going to be going in. There's a lot of people that are going to be getting close to retirement that need to be pulling money out in the next 5 to 10 years. So I would much rather be a little cautious versus being very, very optimistic that it's time in, because what's the upside right now, and you play it by probability. So if everything, and you've just seen 2 weeks of huge unemployment numbers, that will likely continue. The probabilities are not that the market rallies from here. The probabilities are the market probably goes down from here. And again, we don't know that for sure, but RBA Advisors, who's run by an ex-CIO from Merrill, who I followed for a long time, they actually did a study on looking at the market and if you were 6 months early to the bottom or 6 months late to the bottom, which is better if you look at it 12 months after the fact. So again, what's the bottom? You don't know. But again, 6 months early, 6 months late, it's better to be 6 months late. So being patient, again, preaching patience, I think is much more valuable. And again, if I have $100,000 and I take time and buy all the way across, just from a human emotion standpoint, if it drops another 25%, that person is scarred forever. And we're going to talk about scarring here in a second in a blog post. But I mean, that person, if they put in $100,000 after being down 25%, thinking the market's going to rebound, because we have been trained, especially anyone that's younger, in the last 10 years, that the market always recovers in a V shape. It's not always the way it happens.
No, sometimes it's a W or three W's in a row.
There's some structural reasons why. So again, and it's great on this podcast that we can have disagreements, but I would totally not be one to put everything in if I was ready to put in extra money.
Think about what's your time horizon? I mean, if you're using equities as a wealth building tool, you damn better have 10, 15, potentially even 20 years. I mean, I think we can probably all agree that nobody knows in the short term, and whether we want to call that, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, 2 years. I mean, when statistically the average, I'm not really comfortable with the market until you get out to about a 5-year period. I think it's quite honestly gambling otherwise. But what's not gambling is betting on human ingenuity, we're on this 10,000 year streak of continuing to have better and better lives. So if we're kind of thinking really long term, I feel like time in the market, it's kind of hard to argue. And even if we're talking about, that type of time horizon, 20 years, I mean, we're probably going to see a Dow 50,000. So, if you're talking about buying the Dow at 2,300 versus 2,200, oh my gosh, that seems like a huge spike between now and then. But at Dow 50,000 or whatever, it's, hey, I'd love to buy that price. 22,000, 21,000, that's both great.
That's a better synthesis of my argument as well. I just always favor doing the simple thing. I do understand the dollar cost averaging idea though, which is that it provides that emotional cushion against the idea that you bought at the wrong time, because you'll have bought at all the times over the next 5 months or whatever, however long you decide to dollar cost average that money into the market. So I guess you have to work with the individual that you're working with and help them make that decision in the way that most emotionally suits them. Maybe that's the answer, is that like everything in financial planning, there's not like a correct answer. There's just the answer that works best for the client. But I'm always in favor of just putting the money in the market, and assuming we don't need it for anything else, right, in the next 5 to 10 years, and just not thinking about it as much as possible. in the next period of time. But that is where reasonable minds can disagree. Okay, well, why don't we move on to the article that you wanted to cover to wrap up here today?
Yeah, so the article was written by Morgan Housel from the Collaborative Fund. He wrote for the Motley Fool for a long time. Wonderful, wonderful writer. Just fantastic stuff. And he wrote an article called Wounds Heal, Scars Last, which, again, kind of goes into what we were just talking about. But, the two key points that he brings up is a generation of super savers who avoid leverage and are less swayed by opportunity costs. And we'll kind of dive into that. And the second piece was a greater desire for a strong social safety net, driven by a realization that even an extreme preparation cannot fully prepare you for unseen shocks. Because again, if we go back, within basically a month, the market was down 30%. That's extremely
Well, the market
fast.
was down 30% and, 10% of Americans lost their jobs. So like, it's not just the market being down. It's like a huge 1-2 punch, right?
Well, and that's typically the thing that, my argument a lot of times for, the way that you should put money to work and all these other things is, these typical like awful situations like this coincide with also not having, so you don't have any money that you invested and you also lost your job. So now you're doubly screwed from that standpoint. So
that's why the emergency fund piece is so important.
Yeah,
right?
And it is. And I think that conversation that, we all have with clients and they kind of brush it off maybe in the last, couple of years, now that conversation is going to come to the forefront a lot quicker.
See?
Yeah. Like
we get to play the I was right card every time we have that conversation from now on.
Yeah, but he talks about, an economic decline is painful, an economic crash is devastating, but overnight collapse is in a league of its own. He said optimism relies on having confidence in what the future will look like. The longer your field of vision, the better, which I think coincides with both of what you just said. The severity of our decline, particularly unemployment claims, is already unprecedented in modern times. But it's the speed of the decline that will leave its mark, convincing a generation that no matter how secure they feel today, it can be gone tomorrow, literally tomorrow. And I thought that was a great piece that he had in here. And then they looked at in the Great Depression, and again, we talked about that in the 20s, the average participation rate for the generation that experienced the 1930s Great Depression as a teenager or an adult is significantly lower than all other cohorts as far as how they invest in the future. They just were really, really conservative and missed out on a lot of gains because the cohort after them, which experienced the post-war boom, they had a completely different experience. It's kind of like, where did you start? So like for us, like we've seen the great financial crisis, we've seen this, and our peers have. And then you have other people that, have, if I'm a baby boomer, in my earning years, it was .com bust, great financial crisis. Now this, it's like you got hit with three big things that really probably, really cut into your savings as far as what was there. So,
right. And it's not like the average investor has the field of view and the research to look at this like, Morgan does or we do, where it's like, oh, this is just the next thing in a long line of generational defining financial experiences. It's like, this is the thing for a lot of people that will leave an imprint, the scar that he's mentioning in the article, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be very different. So when I read this article, I thought that the first part was interesting, but I more feel like the second part is what's going to be true. I feel like the value of relationships and being close with people is going to go up for like infinite reasons during this period of time. Because that's what we're all craving, right? Like we all want to interact with people because we're all stuck in our house with like our immediate family or whatever, or our roommates. And while those people are amazing, you can't just talk to the same people every day and feel like you are experiencing something socially. So that will increase the value. But then also, I think what he's more alluding to with this is that the social network, the structure that is around our lives is going to become a lot more valuable because also of the financial resources we can draw on. Your friends are more likely to help you by buying you some extra food if they have an income and you don't than anybody else is, and those sorts of things. So I think I totally agree with his number two. I think the number one, the super savers thing might be true, but it's going to be a big leap from where we are today. I think that millennials and maybe even Gen Z are some of the people who are most likely to have accumulated credit card debt in history. Like I'd sit down, 90% of the people I sit down with have credit card debt and student loans and a car loan when I sit down with them the first time. You know what I mean? And I do help them out of that. That's part of what we do. But that doesn't mean that the next person I sit down with won't have all those things. So maybe this is the thing that causes that dramatic shift that says, okay, we're going to start accumulating cash and stop leveraging ourselves so much. But it's going to have to be a big change for a lot of people. And it's going to take a lot of time for that change to be reflected in actual financial statements, because you have a generation of people with consumer debt.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that stems from just like how culture has changed with its appetite for debt. I mean, I know when I was in high school and I was going, talking about college, nobody ever really ever talked about student loans and your ability to repay them and things like that. It was just what you did. It was totally normal. And I think as this stuff, you gotta pay the piper eventually here. And maybe as this starts to pan out, maybe the next generation, we'll call them the Zoomer generation here, born via video conferencing. Who knows? It's we'll see if maybe they're going to be thinking a little bit harder about debt and their ability to repay it and the opportunity cost with that. It's going to be incredible to see how this all pans out.
I know that a couple different people have made comments to me that, any future employer, they're going to ask how they dealt with their staff and employees during this time period, because it is wild to see how many people have been laid off. And this is not like just hourly workers. Like, there are people that had significant jobs that made a lot of money. It's not just college degree or not, like they are out of work or, they were forced to close. So like for me, dentistry was extremely resilient through the great financial crisis. But when you're forced to close because of COVID, no one has a plan for that. When your business just has zero revenue now, like how do you deal with that? And it is very, very different. So I know a lot of people have said that's going to be one of the first questions they ask in interviews. And I think that's going to be a benefit to employers that said, this is how we took care of our people during this.
Yeah. Like imagine interviewing with Patagonia after this and asking them that question. They're like, oh yeah, we suspended all operations and paid our employees their full salaries, which is what they're doing right now. It's like, okay, yeah, I want to come work for you because clearly you value your employees. You took care of them. Versus, and I'm not saying all businesses have infinite resources, but, versus a company that had to lay off all their employees because they didn't keep enough cash reserves and were too leveraged or were too focused on growth. They were reinvesting all their money into marketing or something like that. That is a difficult conversation to have with a future employee.
Do you think this really stifles the entrepreneurial spirit? I feel like for the last 10 years, we've been in this incredible bull market when the market's never going to go down, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know, like this whole, like, go start your own business, start a tech firm, start this, like Jets, I don't know, entrepreneurship. It's so cool. And all of a sudden now it's like, nope, you're out of money, you're out of work. Now you're kind of toast. And other people are like, well, hey, I'm at this big company. I have all these benefits. They're supporting me. Like, even though we're not able to go into the office, I'm still getting paid, et cetera. Does that shift maybe the economy moving forward and even the innovation we see in the next decade?
So many companies were born out of the last financial crisis. And I remember seeing the list of, hey, here's all the businesses that were made. So I think a lot of people are going to have more time on their hands to figure out, hey, if they wanted to chase something, they're going to do it. But I think there definitely is going to be a change of maybe the people that were motivated by, I want to do this because there's a lot of money in it, versus I want to do this because I'm really passionate about what's going on. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see.
I feel like this, to Isaiah's point, is just going to shift the lens on what entrepreneurship is, right? Because for the last 10 years, entrepreneurship was attractive because the economy was doing well. So you can make good money consistently if you had a decent business plan, right? Like, not saying that all businesses were successful over the last 10 years because we still have the same failure rate, but, there was less risk, quote unquote, inherent with it. Like, it was a booming economy. You could do a lot of cool stuff and find investors and all that kind of thing. And I think that, to his point, what's going to change is that the people who are getting into entrepreneurship are going to be getting into it again for the seeing a need that they need to solve within the community, and less because they think they can make $10 million over the next 10 years. And it's going to be less about, wanting control of your income and your destiny, so to speak, and more about, I really, really want to do this to help somebody, or I really, really want to do this because this need is not met in my community at all. That kind of thing. That would be my guess. I don't think entrepreneurship ever goes away. I think it changes. Because there's always going to be somebody who's willing to take the risk if nobody else is willing to. We have enough people in our country, like 300 million people, that's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
At least that's my take.
I think that's a great take. And I liked Isaiah's comment of maybe more entrepreneurs do this because, or actually even maybe you said it, we kind of agreed. So that more entrepreneurs are going to be coming out of the woodwork, not because they want to make money necessarily, but because they just would, like, almost to the extent they'd rather not be alive than not do their passion project. Like, if you have that type of desire to start your business, then you're going to do it in any type of economy, whether we're booming or busting. And maybe that's where a lot of this awesome innovation and awesome companies that are born out of disaster, they really they hit their stride, and it's just super genuine, and they're not trying to fake it.
I think that's a great spot to kind of wrap up the conversation.
Wrap up.
Leave that in. Any closing thoughts?
I would say stick to the emergency fund, stick to your plan. If you can survive this and continue to build wealth in a sustainable way, I feel like this type of recession or this type of bear market could be a launch pad for you. Just make sure that we don't get overly greedy and become individual stock pickers and starting to bet our money down. Just keep sticking to the plan, and it's all going to fare well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get a little high-minded and philosophical here and say that I like to equate market drops to Dante's Inferno, which is like, they really suck. Like, if you read Dante's Inferno, he's not having a fun time going to hell. He's really not. But when he comes out on the other side, he's pure and clean. And that's what happens with our economy every so often, right? So the coronavirus season, I'm really sorry that this is difficult for a lot of people, but the businesses that survive this, the households that survive this will be stronger for it, I hope. And good luck to everybody out there.
Yeah, for me, last thing I'll say, I do think the markets are resilient. I'm not always negative around things. I just think people need to be patient, and you're going to get an awesome opportunity, a generational opportunity to invest. And if you have excess, just be patient with it. Talk to the people that you trust in your circle. And again, I go back to Colin's point, like, stick with the plan, be who you are. Don't go from being like, hey, I buy the market and that's what I do, to now I'm trying to pick which airline's going to survive or which cruise line. That to me is just a recipe for disaster and not a wise way to do things. So just make sure you think about that, and we will be back talking soon, and we'll continue to bring good stuff. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening. We hope we were able to make you laugh and allow you to learn something. For all inquiries and questions, please email financialforesight@gmail.com. If you're on Twitter, feel free to give us a follow and ask a question there as well. Remember, the podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only, and you should not consider what we've talked about investment or tax advice. Please consult your professional team before implementing anything we talked about. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and maybe leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for listening. We'll be talking again soon.